everyone. Welcome to the Class E podcast. I am your host, Mary Sturgill. This is the podcast that's brought to you through a partnership between the Hill Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and the Communication Studies Department here at Furman University. And today we're doing a special episode. It's part of our Everyday Entrepreneur series in which we talk to graduates of our GVL, our Greenville Starts program, in order to share their stories with you in hopes of inspiring you in your own ventures. So today we have a very special guest, Dr. Leigh Holcomb, who is the founder and CEO of Career Catalyst Edge. Dr. Holcomb, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So you started this venture, Career Catalyst Edge. What do you do?
I provide career coaching for professionals that work in pharma and biotech industries. And primarily I help them with planning for a promotion or preparing to pivot from one position to another.
Yeah, all right, cool. So how did you graduated from the university with a Ph.D. in pharmacology and therapeutics. How did you parlay that into this?
So I started out on that traditional academic role where I went and did a postdoc, became an assistant professor at Texas A&M, and got grant funding. Everything looked good. And then the HR person at the hospital called and said, even though I just signed a 3-year contract, that there was a shortfall in funding.
Oh, no.
And no one who had signed a contract was going to have an extension. So 2 weeks notice.
Wow.
So after all that education and effort, and I had a full lab and people working for me and grant funding coming in, I had to think about what a career pivot might look like.
Right.
So fortunately, my department chair parlayed a 1-year contract. And so I'm like, great, by then the grant money will come in. And then about 2 months went by and HR called back again and said, well, we really shouldn't have extended your contract. You have 2 weeks notice.
Oh, wow.
So I waited and prayed a lot, and last hour, last day, they said, we'll extend that to the year. But that was the big wake-up call that, you know, I'd seen other professors where grant funding is extremely competitive. What people don't know is that 93% of science grants don't get funded. It's a lot of failure rate.
That's a big number. That is a lot of failure.
Yeah, and then about 10% of people with PhDs actually get a tenure track professorship. So a lot of people stay in that academic system for a long period of time, or they look for other opportunities. And I was fortunate to have a conversation with a woman that worked for a pharmaceutical company, and she was a sales rep. I'm like, well, how did you get in? And she said, well, actually, with your PhD, you probably should become a medical science liaison. And I had never heard of that job.
What is that? Right, yeah.
And so she said, well, let me put you in touch with my medical science liaison. And so found out that it's a great role where you are interacting with healthcare professionals as the face in the field of the company. And I did a lot of disease awareness education on addiction and sleep, ADHD, multiple sclerosis in my role, and went to conferences, was able to serve as kind of the scientist liaison in the field, and did that for 10 years, and I really enjoyed it. But again, life happens, and somebody rear-ended me, and I had whiplash and a concussion.
Oh, yeah, as you would, yeah.
And that was a heavy travel job.
For sure, yeah.
So, you know, I was out of the house more than I was home.
Right.
And I also had a child that was going to high school. So I was like, well, how do I pivot my career?
Yeah.
And I realized that my senior director in my first company that I worked for, she had a career coach. And all the people that were associate director or above were working with this coach. Yeah. And I was like, well, if they're doing it, well, maybe I should do that. And so I hired somebody to coach me through my transition. And then I decided that that was really what I wanted to do, was help people with their transitions in their career, and especially women in science.
Right. So you are your client. I mean, you've experienced exactly what you're helping them through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you've been there. You can speak from that. So when they come to you, are they trying to? I mean, I'm assuming they're mid-career. They're switching gears to go to something completely different, or just trying to get that raise, or all of the above? Usually
they're wanting to stay in the industry, and they are looking for how do they find their next promotion. Women in science, typically, you'll see a drop off in the first 2 years, you'll see it at 5 years, and then by the time you get to that senior management level, about 15% of women that actually started in the industry are still retained. So there's a huge drop off over time. And it's a challenging work. But
male dominated.
Male dominated. And also, if you have children, everybody knows with COVID, the challenges of that. So a lot of it is how do you coordinate life, and where work is a subset of your life. And if you choose to go for promotion, what does that look like? And what, there's always a plus, there's always a minus. Are you willing to do that? And do you need additional training? Do you need mentors and sponsors? Maybe you need to network better. There's always does your resume reflect what you've done? And does your LinkedIn profile attract people that could potentially hire you?
Right. So I imagine that many of us, it is hard to kind of toot your own horn, right? Just in talking to people, I discover this all the time, and in my personal life, I've had that issue. But if you're not going to toot your own horn, nobody else is either. So you need to toot your own horn. I imagine a lot of what you do is helping people find ways to show this is how good I am at my job, and these are the skills that I bring to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
I actually worked as a recruiter in the pharma industry and medical device and biotech industry. So that was part of what I had to do, was one, find good candidates, and then help them to be able to articulate why should somebody hire them.
Yes, yeah. So when someone hires you, how does that process work? Do you meet with them one-on-one and then kind of do an assessment of everything first? Is that how you start?
So yeah, I have been doing a lot of one-on-one coaching. And that way you get the personalized attention for your career. And I am certified through the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching in a survey attitudinal assessment called the Energy Leadership Index. So we all have ways that we show up when things are great, and then we have the way you show up when things are stressful or bad. And we're not often self-aware of what happens. So the first part is self-awareness. Is how are you showing up? Is it serving you? Will it get you to the next level that you want to go? What are your values? Is the company that you're currently working for, is there a values mismatch? Especially if you want to pivot and go somewhere else. Money is not always the motivating factor, and especially in women's careers. So what is it that makes you want to make the change? Have you prepared for it? Most people realize that the job market is flexible and changing. Have you prepared for maybe being unemployed? Are you financially prepared, emotionally prepared? My dad's generation got a job and stayed at it.
Started to say, exactly.
So how are you managing your family members as you go through your job search and transition? My generation, maybe 6 to 8 years, 10 years, that's a good long run, but multiple different roles, maybe in the same company and then maybe going somewhere else. And my daughter's going to college now, and it's every 2 to 3 years going to be changing roles. And much of what we do as entrepreneurs is project-based as well. But everybody else their job's becoming more like that as well. And
I think so too,
how do you become resilient in transitions?
I think that's something that we could really learn from this younger generation, in that, because so many of us from the older generations are less likely to change jobs even when we're unhappy, and we're more likely to stick with it, whereas this younger generation sees a path forward, not necessarily built on money or finances, but in part, of course, but in creating a better life for themselves. And that's what I see. And I'm so lucky, I think, to work at Furman, because I see the students, I'm inspired by my students, and I see them looking down, those potential paths that they could go down, and really analyzing, does that fit with the lifestyle that I want to create for myself, right? And I think it's great that you're helping people make those alignments for themselves, because we're going to create happier people if we do that, right?
One of my passions as a neuroscientist is the fact that everybody's brain works differently. And so later in life, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and my daughter has ADHD and dyslexia. and a math learning disability called dyscalculia that most people don't know about.
Right.
And so I realized that I cried in 3rd grade because I couldn't get my math times tables in 1 minute like that. You know, I still became a scientist.
Right.
You know, so how do we keep people in the field? Girls get discouraged by age 15. There's like a window between 11 and 15.
Yep.
That if you can keep them engaged, then they'll go on and then, you know, go through the training to go into the workforce. But then how do you maintain them in the workforce? So my daughter is elected to become an animator. So she's
that's awesome. I love it. I can't wait to see some of her work. Are you finding, I would think, and this is just my theory off the top of my head, I would think that with your help, especially since most of your clients are women, that with your help you can basically give them more longevity in the STEM fields and thus create a field of women in those STEM fields who are not opting out at the 10-year, 15-year mark, but going and staying for their entire careers.
So I'm actually going to be speaking at the Life Science Women's Conference in September. This is my 2nd time. They invited me to do on-stage workshop and a panel this time. And it's all about career pathing. And that there is no ladder now. It's all kind of squiggly, and you know, you may have to backtrack or go off ramp, but you know, realistically, you have skills, you have values, you have strengths. How are those going to show up in a way that will permit you to do work that you find joy in and that somebody's going to pay you for?
Exactly. That's the big thing. Enjoy. It's that balance, that work. I mean, we say that all the time, but it really is that work-life balance. And how do you achieve that? I know it probably could not have been easy just to start this and all of a sudden have clients. What kind of obstacles did you face in starting this?
So part of it is being the part-time entrepreneur and having the day job and then really making the commitment to go full-time. So I actually did a lot of networking. So as a recruiter, when I started, I had like 350 connections on LinkedIn.
Oh, nice.
I have 10,000 now.
And
they're all pretty much in my client population. And going to different networking meetings, like I volunteered with SC Bio, which is here in South Carolina, going to Life Science Women's Conference, a Healthcare Business Women's Association is another great organization that supports women, and then also doing Greenville Starts to help build out the science side. I'm comfortable. I did my coaching certification. It's the business side. You know, and I'm like, okay, well, I need an accountant. You know, there are things I don't really want to do. I need to be the face of my business. How do I get visible? And some of it is just saying yes to opportunities like this.
Absolutely. Saying yes is a huge, I mean, I think saying yes and being open to any possibility is a huge part of any entrepreneurial journey. But my hope is that just by living my life, and I influence my nieces and nephews and everybody who's in my circle, that I influence them to do the same by saying yes and don't throw up roadblocks that don't exist, until you get to a roadblock and then figure out how to get over it,
But is that a limiting belief or is it a definite closed door?
Exactly.
And that's what a coach can help you.
Yeah, I love it. So speaking of Greenville Starts, what are some of the takeaways that you have? I mean, that's an 8-week commitment, but you learn so much. And you're exposed to the sides of business that you did not necessarily have experience in before. What were some of the takeaways that you had from that?
The importance of building a community. So I had been working from home and being more extroverted. I wanted to find people that also shared that entrepreneurial interest and phenomenal people, and to be able to support them with the skill sets that I have. I've been trained to be a speaker, and many people haven't. There are other people that have lived in the Greenville area and they're very familiar with, like, I need to establish a woman-owned business. How do you do that? Getting referrals for who would you use as an accountant? You know, we had people come in to talk about finances. We had venture capitalists come in. We had people from the first cohort come in and talk about their experience. And we got to celebrate, you know, the successes, but also the struggles. And I think realistically, one of my strengths is strategic and maximizer. To go 8 weeks, and it's not that much of a monetary investment to be able to have access to all that quality education and training and networking is phenomenal. Yeah. So if you want to skyrocket your entrepreneurial journey, join Greenville Starts.
Yeah. And if you're having problems, then chances are someone either in your cohort or in one of the guest speakers that they bring in, one of the educators, you're going to figure out, okay, if I can't fix this problem, they will connect me to someone who can fix this problem, or they can fix the problem, right? So that networking is so important, and getting connected to the people that kind of fill in your personal gaps, I think is so important.
I think the other thing is, a lot of us, we go in with this big idea. Like, I want to have a business and I want it to be this, and I'm going to like coach everybody.
Right.
Well, that's not going to be sustainable.
Not realistic.
You know, but also to be able to have your messaging and go, okay, yes, if I was your ideal client, I would call you or hire you or connect with you. Or no, it flopped.
Right. So speaking of that, there's only one you. How do you scale up, or how do you grow your business to a point that you would like to grow it to?
So I'm going to group coaching and going for evergreen video content. So I actually have hired a video coach. His name's Paul Gordon. He's over in Denmark. And to get more comfortable being on camera.
Right.
I've done lots of stage training. I've been a professor. I've taught, you know, so standing in front of people is not that hard. But you know, being on a camera, it's a little bit different.
It is. You know, one of the best pieces of advice, I was a news anchor for 20 years, and one of the best pieces of advice that anyone gave me was a news anchor in Phoenix. I was in Arizona State in grad school at the time. And she said, Mary, the camera's just another person. And look through the camera like you're looking into somebody's eyes. Because what most people do is they stop at the camera lens, and you can tell when people do that, right? And so you just have to look through the camera. And so that's the best piece of advice.
I'm going to say that looking through the camera, the last interview I did, I had to do on camera. Exactly. It was not an in-person interview for a job. And most people are experiencing that now.
Exactly. That's such a good point, because I'm thinking back to when I was hired here, and I think if my first interview was on camera, for this and another position that I was up for, I was a finalist for, and it was between this one and that one, and both of them were on camera, you know, so you have to be able to connect with people through that lens. I mean, my God, the COVID, it's taught us nothing else, it's that, right?
But you can turn on your camera, and I mean, my daughter's virtual schooled, so that's great. But has she learned the professional way to show up on camera? Exactly. That's a different level.
Oh, completely, completely. So what are some of the pieces of advice that you, either through your personal experience or through Greenville Starts, would like to share with some of our viewers?
So the first thing that I really wish I had known is that 80% of jobs are never advertised. There's a hidden job market. So learning to network and having people refer you is really key. So that's number one. Number two is, I learned as a recruiter that the formatting of your resume makes a difference. If you put your name in the header, it doesn't go into the system, you'll never get a call. If you use those 2-column type templates, I've seen it. Somebody sent me a resume, I knew it was coming in, but their name and phone number and their contact info was not there. Fortunately, I was catching that.
Oh my gosh.
So if you're wondering why you're not getting a job interview, it could be that.
I'm sitting here with my mouth wide open, so the people on YouTube could see that, but people listening can't. But I'm looking, I'm envisioning my resume right in my head, and of course it's at the top, because that's what we were taught back when I was in high school, right? So such good information. Keep it coming. What else?
So in Greenville Starts, I think just having those conversations, those messy conversations about where you are, be honest, your fears, the failures, and the successes, because usually the things you see on Facebook or LinkedIn is everybody's successes. And so to be able to say, you know what, I tried this and it didn't work for me, maybe somebody else has a different solution. Many of the training programs, they give you some rudimentary things about how to run a business, but I got into an entrepreneurship group where people said, okay, you don't have to spend $10,000 on a website. I did mine on Wix. You know, I still have a presence. I have a way for people to connect with me. But realistically, I have a relationship business. And, you know, I don't think much I can put online is going to convince them, you know, beyond the contact.
The initial reach out.
Yeah.
And then once they do that initial reach out, then it's your job to build that relationship with them. Yeah, completely. Yeah. I mean, I teach digital storytelling, and part of what we do in that class is my students leave the class with an e-portfolio, which we build on Wix. Yeah. So it's so simple and so easy.
It's a great skill to have.
It's a great skill to have, and an easy one to pick up, right? That you could do, or you could, here I'll put a plug in for my students, hire one of my students to build your Wix site for you, because we have plenty who can. Let's talk about some of the mistakes that you've made and what you've learned from them.
I think some of the mistakes I've made was not really preparing for my transitions as well as I could. Mm-hmm. You know, all of a sudden something happens, you're like, okay, I'm going to change jobs.
Right.
Well, you don't realize that sometimes your paycheck doesn't come in for a month or 2 months.
Oh, right, yeah.
You know, your health insurance may not carry over.
Right, yeah.
There may be you may have to like send back laptops and equipment, and you know, what are the processes that need to go on in order to transition well? Yeah. So there's that, you know, what do I need to do? But a lot of it is really prepping the people that love you for the fact that you're changing jobs.
Yeah.
And how does that happen?
Right. So you cover all of that. You cover not just the professional stuff, but the emotional and because it does, it's a holistic approach is what it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So for people who would like to get in touch with you, how should they go about doing that?
I'm on LinkedIn. So Leigh Holcomb, Ph.D. Career Catalyst Edge is my website. So www.careercatalysedge.com. Those are the two easiest ways to get in touch with me.
Excellent. Well, and so folks, if you're listening, if someone you know, contact her because she can help you a lot. Leigh, thank you so much for being on the show with us.
Thank you. I appreciate the time here and hope this was very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking in the back of my head that maybe we should do a whole episode on just advice for people who are switching careers and things like that, because that's a great. People need to know that stuff.
That was one of my goals with my daughter was eventually you have to get a job and move out of my house. And so how do we find you a college pathway where they have industry connections so that you don't just end up with a degree hanging on your wall, but you actually get that job offer.
And get that foot in the door. All right, everyone, remember, if you are an entrepreneur or someone you know is an entrepreneur, or you just have an idea, maybe you don't even think of yourself as an entrepreneur yet, you might want to check out the Greenville Starts program, and it's super easy to do. Go Google Greenville Starts and Furman, and it should be the very first thing that pops up, and then get yourself in the next cohort that has slots available. I do know that when they announce those cohorts, they fill up pretty fast. So, but you can always get yourself on the calendar for the next one. The other thing I want to tell you about is that the Class C podcast has a new TikTok channel. So you can follow us on TikTok and see some behind the scenes stuff that our producers do. It's a lot of fun, and hopefully you'll get some good laughs. And you can find us wherever you listen to your podcast. And of course, if you want to watch the podcast, we're also on YouTube as well. Just look for the Class C podcast. That does it for this episode. Remember, this podcast is brought to you through a partnership between the Hill Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and the Communication Studies Department here at Furman University. It is produced by two student producers, Kayla Patterson and Eliza Polich, which is a true example of the Furman advantage. And I am, of course, your host, Mary Sturgill. Until next time, everybody, dream big.